Welcome, everybody. My name is Will McMahon. I'm part of the kind of task steering group. This evening's discussion is, does Labour remain a place for socialists to make their case? And it's a vexed discussion. It's been going on for about 60 years at least, I seem to remember, but it has additional prominence now. Do keep in mind that you are being recorded, and it will be out on YouTube. To be aware of that and when you're speaking. Our speaker today who's going to introduce for us is Steve Forrest, who's going to be chatting for and talking for about 15 minutes or so. We keep to time on TAS meetings, so Steve will be talking 15 minutes and then everybody else will get 3 minutes to make their contribution. You'll be doing it by raising your virtual hand if at all possible. Then we'll give Steve an opportunity to make comments midway through the session. We can have a second round, and then we will be summing up. Just before we go on to today's discussion, just to tell you, it's good also to hear where people are coming from. John Smithies put his, where he's coming from there, it's great. In a fortnight, we'll have Moshe Machover, who will be speaking about events in Palestine. A fortnight today will be starting at 7 o'clock. Rather than 7:30, so please note that down in your diary. It's 7 o'clock rather than 7:30. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve. I'm going to ask him to unmute himself to give us a 15-minute introduction on does the Labour Party remain the place for socialists to play their case. Over to you, Steve. And I'll tell you when you've got
Thank
five, okay?
Yep, sure. Thank you for the invite. Before we start, obviously this discussion is one that's taken place through, I don't know, probably 120 years of socialism. It's a fascinating discussion. I would imagine that there's people on this room, chat room, that have pretty entrenched positions on this one way or the other. And I think it's really important that we have a full and frank discussion, and perhaps one that doesn't lead us down the path of our perhaps entrenched positions, and hopefully at the end of it we can all have a bit more of an understanding, because I think one of the weaknesses of discussing this is that we've all got those entrenched positions, whereas none of us really need to operate from that level. So hopefully, as all these discussions have, they've been very friendly, amicable, and I look forward to this this evening. I did speak to Will earlier to clarify as to what he needed me to talk on, and it's more of a broad brush as to where we're at. Obviously, the discussion can perhaps pick up some more theoretical points, and then I can come back in on some of those if necessary. I would say perhaps the Labour Party members that are on here, including me, perhaps you know, the Orwell thought police are out there somewhere, and we just need to be perhaps wary of that when we say certain things and certain phraseology. If they get you in the end, they get you in the end. But this would put that out there. So for me, I just make some points just to introduce the discussion. I think if we start, really, I think a really interesting place to start is if you start. People look at it, don't they, and they say that Jeremy Corbyn had a Corbyn surge. But I think it's really important to note that surge was really started to take place after the defeat of Ed Miliband, before Corbyn even threw his hat in the ring, before there was even really the leadership election. And even in the run-up to Miliband possibly winning, I think people had enough already of austerity from the Tories, and you know, workers and youth had already begun to draw the conclusion that they were going to join the Labour Party and try and campaign for anti-austerity, grappling towards some sort of perhaps socialist policies, but they would never have known that at that point. And then obviously under Corbyn, we had a real explosion in growth and in membership. My own CLP, Harrow West, went up from about 400 members to 1,000. There was some that went literally, Lewisham and Deptford went from about 800 to about 5,000. It's an absolutely astonishing growth in membership growth in the Labour Party throughout that period. And I think what's really interesting for us to understand is that there's a lot of organisations, some of which I would say have been represented on this meeting tonight. But as I say, that we're not having a sort of sectarian discussion in our own cubbyholes as well as such. But I think it's really interesting to note that at various points in the last 30 years, the left have gone into different independent organisations like Tusk or the Socialist Party or the Socialist Labour Party or what other formulations. But ultimately, and this is my main point that I will make this evening, is that when the working class move into action, when they start grappling towards socialism, angry at what society has given them, they move towards their mass organisation. And in Britain, that is represented by the Labour Party. We're told, I'm not quoting here, but if I can paraphrase a famous Russian person that I'm not quoting, but if a worker barely awakened to political life seeks a mass organisation without distinguishing as yet either programs or tactics, he will naturally join the Labour Party. And that's where I come from politically. And I believe that is where we are at. There's no tradition in Britain, in my view, even the ILP, that attracted, I believe, 100,000 members when it first split off from the Labour Party. But within a matter of 2 years, had gone 3 ways. A third had left politics, a third had drifted back into the Labour Party, and a third remained in the lump ILP. But the other examples in history in Britain are that Britain does not attract independent left parties. There is no room or scope, and the working class do not go looking for independent left parties. They look towards the Labour Party and they look towards the Labour Party. And under Corbyn, as I say, it is a test case, it's a laboratory case. Who would have imagined? I mean, those that joined those organisations in the 90s, the 2000s, it was a bolt out of the blue. But for us who have a perspective that workers will move towards mass organisations and the Labour Party will hold that perspective, we're not in any way, shape, or form surprised that that was the outcome. And I remember on election night in 2017, 1917 would be lovely, but in 2017. Up at the housing estate here, there were hundreds of kids queuing, and they were walking up to say, "Have you got the Jeremy Corbyn leaflets?" And they were, they were so enthusiastic for that policies. They weren't looking, to be blunt, for the SLP, the SP, or any other pure socialist Marxist party. They were grappling towards the Labour Party, and the lesson that we can take from that, I believe, is that we as socialists have a responsibility to be in the Labour Party, fighting for socialist ideas, fighting for socialist policies. And even now, after going through the purge, there has been a purge of the left within the Labour Party. I do believe that the pandemic was very convenient for the right wing of the party, because it managed to put all meetings on Zoom, and it gave them a sort of an artificial control of the meetings that took place. But there has been a determined purge of the left, absolutely. But that, for me, is a confirmation that they feared Corbyn, and it was only, Corbyn is a good guy, but he's not too bold a socialist. But it was an indication of what direction. And for example, if you see Glastonbury, for me, they don't want that potential of young people looking at Glastonbury, thousands upon thousands of young people. It's just a vision. I'm not saying that's like a mass movement, but it's a vision of what they didn't want. And they set out to ensure that that's not the case. But that isn't a justification for us to establish an independent workers' party. That's a justification for us to analyse where we come from, what the perspective is for struggle. And I think just looking at the time, I usually get an hour plus translation, but just looking at the time there, I think what we got to look at is it most likely looks like it will be a Labour government, a majority Labour government. You have to have a Blair majority. A Blair victory gives you a one-seat win. Let's not have any overestimation of where we might be. It might be a 40 or 50, but it's not going to be that big. But a lot of people, workers and youth, will be looking to that Labour government to deliver on the environment, on foreign policy issues, on the cost of living crisis, on housing. And what happens when this Labour government fails to do that because they offer nothing and we're in a capitalist crisis? Where do the workers go? The youth, environmental activists, campaigners, anti-racist campaigners. For me, and this is the point I'm trying to make, just to open up the discussion, they begin to move towards a Labour Party, and they begin to move towards the unions, but then they begin to move towards a Labour Party in order to right the wrong of the disappointment that they've gone through. And that's always been the case in Britain, and it will be repeated again. And I understand that there's a number of people on this call that are no longer in the Labour Party, that have been removed, expelled, suspended. But what I would say to those comrades is, that in itself, Nye Bevan, Michael Foot were also expelled. These are not permanent things. Thank you. These are not permanent things. And also, there's been a message flashed up on the screen, and I think that is absolutely correct. And I think some of the people that are currently resigning over this crisis in the Middle East should really think again, because it's almost like every time they resign over this crisis, they're giving a gift. If I'm being blunt, they're giving a gift to Starmer and the right wing. We need to stand our ground at the moment, and we need to put the case carefully, boldly, against the national position on this crisis. And even just on this national position on this crisis, do we think, if we look at some of the names that have come out for a ceasefire, do we actually believe that those are doing it off their own back? No, even now, even at this early stage, it is an indicator of where we will be under a Labour government. These people are not doing this in a vacuum. They are doing this because they are being challenged, and the mood exists within their communities. They're fearful for their seats, yes, but the mood exists in their communities and generally in society to come out in favour of a ceasefire. Front benchers, unusual names in favour of a ceasefire. It doesn't exist. Politics does not exist in a vacuum, and I think it's really important for us to understand that. And what I would say is that for those, I think it's the important thing is, what do I get it. If you get expelled or whatever, where do you go? What do you do? Well, I would say there's work in the trade unions, work in environmental campaigns, there's work on this ceasefire, Gaza. There's lots of work to do in the communities, in the unions, but that isn't a reason to turn away from the Labour Party. We have to understand the role the Labour Party plays in British society. I'm not going to open this up in 15 minutes to how the role of mass organisation plays out internationally. That's possibly another discussion or part of this as comrades come in. But I would say in Britain, the perspective is for a majority Labour government disappointing the working class grappling, as they always have, towards their mass organisation. And it is the responsibility of socialists, however much we may be disappointed with what's took place in the 2 or 3 years since Corbyn lost the election, or 4 years since Corbyn lost the election. But we have to understand that that is only 4 years. That's, it's not an epoch. It's 4 years. And I would just perhaps finish with this. Did the right wing when they were defeated in 2015, 4%, Liz Kendall, did they walk away from the Labour Party? No, they didn't. They stood their ground. All right, a few left for that new SDP, but there was a few people. But the vast majority of people on the right stood their ground and maintained their position because they understand the role that the British Labour Party plays in society. And for me, the struggle for the future of socialism plays itself out with inside the struggle for socialism in Britain plays itself out with inside the party of the working class, which is the Labour Party. It is not, we don't have the luxury in this country, or in my view, in any country, for the pure socialist Marxist party. We have a struggle, however right or wrong it is, however nasty it is, dirty it is, we have a responsibility to struggle and lead the struggles and be the pole of attraction for the newly emerging workers and youth into the Labour Party. And that is the perspective that we need to work towards and hold out for. Anything else doesn't work, it's been proven not to work, and that is the perspective that I will put forward. And I'll leave it there. Look forward to a good, friendly, non-sectarian discussion, and then we can all come in. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Steve, and I echo your sentiments there. Let's have a discussion with each other about the complexities of what we're facing and different positions that people are taking, why they're taking them, and tease out what we think the issues are. Now, as I said before, people are using electronic hands. That's really good. I've got a couple of people with their hands up, John and Graham. Everybody gets 3 minutes. If you're new to the meeting, everybody gets 3 minutes without question. Nobody gets any more than 3 minutes. Okay, so I will stop you at 3 minutes. Okay, so John Smithy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, well, it seems that Steve is brought up in the school of Ted Grant, that the mass organisations are telling him to look at what's happened in France, and that's what's going to happen after the next general election. The Socialist Party in France came to power in 2011 on a radical programme, and they didn't carry it through. People became disillusioned, and the Socialist Party only gets 3% in election, 5% in elections. That's what's going to happen to the Labour Party. It's finished. Where I live in Wisbech in northeast Cambridgeshire, I live in Wisbech, a town, including villages, of 35,000 people, and there's not a Labour Party branch. The constituency under Corbyn had 450 members. Now it's down to 50, mainly middle-class liberals who've moved into the area from Cambridge because they can't afford to live in Cambridge. I think this thing, like today, Andy McDonald being suspended for saying something which was completely reasonable, this shows the way Starmer's going to act, and he is going to complete the Blair project of turning the Labour Party into the US Democrats. My own view is the trade unions are a waste of time. They're bureaucratic, and what it means is you don't want a Labour Party Mark II. What you need is a Marxist party, a Communist party. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Graham Durham, can I ask you to unmute yourself and come in? You're off. Go on.
Thank you. I think one of the things that astonishes me about this debate, which runs endlessly about whether we need a left party or whether we need a Labour Party, is people's lack of historical knowledge. Anybody who's studied, for example, the wondrous government of 1945 will know that that was a Atlanticist, American supporting government that supported all sorts of atrocities against the Greek working class, that And Aaron Bevan, that great hero of many people in the Labour Party, ended up demanding nuclear bombs be created to defend British imperialism and so on and so forth. And so there's never really been a left figure or a left tradition in the Labour Party that has been pure. And those were the best people. We'll go back through Ramsay MacDonald, Tony Blair, and so on. So we're missing the point if we think, my opinion is we're missing the point if we think it's about this or that Labour leader and what they did. And the thousands of people who've come on my Facebook page, which posts every day, and told me that they can never vote for Starmer again. To me, they lack that historical knowledge, because I'm with Steve. The historical position is the working class of this country are looking for a Labour government. You might not like the fact that it's a Starmer government. I don't. Starmer had me expelled a couple of years ago, but I still want a Labour government. I'll still vote Labour. And I do not believe for a second that any of the groups that have emerged since Corbyn was defeated have a hope in hell of creating anything on the left. And I would quote 30 years, 40 years of history of the left trying to do that. First of all, we have got an ossified set of sects in Britain. I use the word sect advisedly because it's not just the WRP, the SWP and their inability. It's the militant, it's the Socialist Party, it's Socialist Appeal, led by individuals from 30, 40 years ago who have the same sectarian attitude towards the rest of the left. I'm one who's been lectured by Ted Grant back in the 70s for not joining the militant and not being part of the movement. How ironic. Ted will be turning in his grave, actually, that the Socialist Party is now outside the Labour Party and is lecturing people on how we must build a Marxist party.
Graham,
so
I'm going to have to stop you there. You can come in again. You'll get another 3 minutes. I'll stop you there. Thanks for finishing.
Okay.
That's you. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the problem being, of course, is what we're facing is the degeneracy of virtually everything. I mean, what we're looking at, if you look at the history of the Labour Party, actually, Labour Party is propped up by Stalinism and the existence of Stalinism, and we see, clearly now that it's again, I mean, an imperialist organisation, an organisation which is quite prepared to support and organise mass slaughter, as we can see at the moment. The point being, okay, what we're also seeing is the institutions that exist falling apart. Not only, obviously, the capitalist ones, but also, of course, the organisations of the working class. I mean, the interesting thing about, if you're here in Scotland, I mean, what we see, you can see the Labour Party's virtually disintegrated. It has virtually no members. It has a marginal base of support. We now have a crisis of nationalism, because obviously that's failed as well. So the thing what we're getting now is basically mass abstention, as in fact, bourgeois democracy itself comes under question. 50% of people in Glasgow don't vote because they can't see anybody to vote for. When you have to say they have the case, there's none of these jokers actually going to do anything for you, or produce anything that's of any use, because obviously the only thing they have is an extension of the current, which is falling living standards and imperialist attacks on bits of the world. If you look at, say, the Palestinian demo, the interesting thing about Palestinian demo in the last 3 weeks here is that it's actually much larger than anything the unions could do. I mean, the problem is the unions have 50 years of virtually unbroken betrayals and sellouts. I mean, they have a big membership, but they couldn't get any of that number of it on the street because people don't believe in them anymore. And that's the problem we've got, and again, you see, and this is also the case for the left. I mean, if you go through the left has had serious chances. I mean, particularly here, the Scottish Socialist Party, It's pissed them all up against the wall. So it's a question that as I say, it's degeneracy of everything. The question is, can anybody produce a political organisation which is serious, which actually does something, and can carry through a decent programme? Because otherwise, obviously, what we're also seeing, of course, is the rise of the far right in lots of places, and including, you suspect, here at some point. This is the alternative, and it certainly isn't. I mean, it certainly isn't Starmer. I mean, we know. I mean, we can quite clearly see that that government, if he comes in now, will be hated within weeks. Certainly, by vast majority of people. I mean, I think there's even an issue in terms of if Corbyn had won an election. The problem was, of course, he wouldn't deliver, would he?
Hey, Matthew, I'm gonna stop you there because you've had your 3 minutes,
Thank you.
and I'm gonna go on to thanks, Matthew. You're welcome to come in again as ever. Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Will. So I'm going to disagree with the general argument that Steve is putting forward. I think it is probably common ground of everyone on the call that we all want to see the socialist and democratic transformation of society, and that is our fundamental aim at the level of principle. What unites us, but the question of, for example, whether we should be active in the Labour Party or not, and what form that activity might take, it is at a much more superficial level. It's at a level of tactics, which it's perfectly reasonable to have disagreements, even sharp disagreements about. And so I think the question of whether that particular tactic of being involved in the Labour Party as communists, as socialists, is something which has to be dictated by the circumstances that we find ourselves in, the facts on the ground, if you want to put it in that way. It's not something that you can elevate into a general principle and then whatever you decide will always be correct. I think taking the most obvious and the most recent example that is on our minds, which is the situation in the Labour Party during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, I think I'm more inclined to see that as an aberration, so an exception to the norm of what the Labour Party is normally like, and therefore also an exception to the norm of how socialists should relate to it, rather than what I understand Steve to be saying, which is that it's more a recurrence of a historical trend, a historical pattern that happens time and again. The reason that I think it was important for socialists to be active in the Labour Party during Corbyn's leadership, and indeed defending Corbyn's leadership critically, was not because I particularly agreed with Jeremy Corbyn's programme, or that I thought that it could succeed in its own terms, or that I thought it was sufficient to achieve the kind of social transformation that we need. I think the experience of left governments of various kinds in various countries should have been enough to tell us that the project wasn't going to succeed. But I think the reason that it was important was, first of all, because it changed the size, to put it crudely, of the Labour Party, and changed the significance of the Labour Party within British politics, within the class struggle in this country. And what it also did was it inaugurated an unusual period of political liberty within the Labour Party.
Ed,
because
I'm going to have to stop you there.
So I'll cut there. That's why it was important for us to be active in it during that time. It doesn't hold true the rest of the time.
Thank you very much, Ed. Pascal, over to you if you unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm of the position now that we need to move forward from the Labour Party. There's not any policies that the Labour Party offer that I want to support as a grassroots socialist activist, and I think, they're not anti-racist. They're anti some people and pro other people, and I think, you know, that in itself is a huge issue. There's no policies that they're offering to the working class. I feel that I thought what Matthew said was great. I'm very on board with what Matthew was saying, and Ed, I think you were brilliant too. I'm sorry. I know there's loads of people on here that agree that we all have to be in the Labour Party and we all have to do it through the Labour Party, but I think when you talk to people on the ground, when you're active, when you're seeing what's going on the ground, you're seeing the communities, you're working in the communities, you're going to the demonstrations, you're talking to the people, you do actually see that people do understand what's happening. And I think there's room there for a new movement. What the movement is, I don't know. We're all having that discussion. I can't say what it is. But I definitely feel that we need to move away from the Labour Party. I don't think it substantiates any of the views that I personally hold. I'm a bit in agreement about unions. The unions don't seem to be backing us at the moment. I know loads of people leaving unions at the moment, particularly Unite. I've heard a lot of people leaving Unite. Is the left winning the elections? Yeah, they won in the NEU, but are they winning in other unions? I'm not so sure. Although people do say that Sharon, can't remember her surname, Unite, is of the left. Some of the things that have come out recently, I'm not again so sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my mind is kind of quite in a muddle about everything. But I know one thing, and I left the Labour Party 3 years ago, and I feel much better for it. And I feel that there's something to move forward with, and I think that's what we need to channel as socialists. So yeah, I'll shush now.
Beautifully timed, actually. Beautifully
Yeah,
timed.
I'm a woman. We're good at that.
I'm going to hand over to Minnie's room because I don't know who it is. Is it you, Minnie? You need to come off mute.
Yeah, it's me. Thanks, Will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Steve's, your position, that's your position, fine. It's not my position. When I joined the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sitting next to someone who used to be a militant. And although he supported Corbyn, my partner Graham here, he wouldn't join the Labour Party. He just knew what was going to happen. I agree with Ed, who said Corbyn's years was an aberration, although it was full of hope, vigour, and so many of us joined. Do you know what used to piss me off? The amount of people saying, and people, Marxist communists saying, we must stay in the Labour Party and fight. The Labour Party was over like a year before they were still saying that. It's just crazy. So when I was in the Labour Party, I couldn't get a motion through to support Julian Assange, who revealed war crimes. I couldn't get a motion through against the increase in defence spending of the Tory party and a transition to useful work, useful production. Now we have the Labour Party under Starmer, supporting genocide. How much worse could it get? Someone has also put the Labour Party in its historical context, the 1945 regime's foreign policy, which wasn't good, and I've learned a lot about. The word grappling means dealing with a difficult situation. I don't find it difficult or something that's difficult to understand. I was really, really shocked by the amount of opportunists in the Labour Party who had bad faith. I haven't been removed, expelled or suspended. I left, and I'm on the left. You can't fight for socialist ideas, policies in the Labour Party. I would say, Steve, you can't. There's no free speech. It's all closed down. Liz Kendall does understand what the Labour Party is. It's capitalism second 11. She gets it. I left when an ex-Israeli spy was taken on, as was it social media, something to do with social media. That was just it for me. I remember the leadership debates and people who were activists they were duped by Keir Starmer, but enough was known about Keir Starmer already. His closeness to security services, his rush to want to punish people in the riots who'd stolen bottles of water and perhaps put them in prison. Also, what he's supposed to have done against Julian Assange. Don't you let
Emily,
this
I'm going to
case
have
go.
to wrap up.
Oh, right, okay. I haven't got enough time really. Anyway,
You can come back.
and I don't hold out any hope or solidarity with the trade union bureaucracy either. You're just financing the balance sheet for them, even if you work for them. Thanks for now.
Thanks very much. Janet, over to you.
All right, thank you. I think Steve started by reminding Labour Party members who are on this call that remember, I think he said something like the Orwell thought police are out there, and it seems that sums up actually the point about the pointlessness of being in the Labour Party right now. And I think that was said by Minnie very coherently. But I certainly agree with Ed. It seems to me that we have to respond to the circumstances that exist at the time. And I think he spelt out what the context is in terms of Corbynism and where we are now and where we were before. And for those who talk about history, yes, of course, you're right, but precedent doesn't necessarily predict the future, or we'd never have anything new. We'd never have any new parties. We wouldn't have had the Labour Party, actually, probably. I think if I've always thought I left, I don't know, 2 years ago. I've never really got that argument that we need a Labour government which will fail and that will raise consciousness, and there'll be a mass movement within the Labour Party that will somehow, change the world as we see it. I don't see that at all. But I think I could say, well, I wouldn't because we only got 3 minutes. I'd say a lot theoretically, but I think today I'm going to say something emotive and personal. And it seems to me that no socialist should be in the Labour Party right this minute, because the Labour Party is complicit in war crimes. We all know that. I'm not saying that Steve is complicit, or any of you here that are on the left. Of course you're not complicit, but you're a member of a party which is complicit. And I don't know if it's Steve, I think it was somebody else who said, we all have a responsibility to stay and fight within the Labour Party. Well, I don't feel that responsibility. And as a Jew, I have to say, I feel it's my responsibility to fight outside and fight the Labour Party, because this is so horrific that I can't actually imagine being in the Labour Party. And I know that, that's not a strategic position. It's not a well thought out position. It's emotional. It's not Marxist. It's not any of those things. But that's how I feel. I mean, I've always felt that people, for the last 2-3 years, people shouldn't stay in the Labour Party. Now, I think I just can't believe that people think they can. You can always go back to the Labour Party if this revolution happens. Well, I don't think I can, because I've said too much.
Janet, I think I've got to call you to a halt there. Sorry. Dr. Jim, I'm really sorry. I missed your hand up. People have told me off on your behalf. Over to you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You've got 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think people have the audacity to talk about you can't be a socialist and member of the Labour Party. Well, I've been a member of the Labour Party 62 years when I came to this country as a child. And I fought, I was a councillor, county, borough, parish for a total of 39 years. Stood for Parliament in Milton Keynes in 1983, and I've been a socialist. It's easy to walk away. It's hard to stay and fight. I remained in the Blair years, fighting the Blairites. I tell you this, Lenin said, we only have a bourgeoisie, but we've got a bourgeois working class. And there's a lot of people who calls the working class revolutionary. I suppose you mean in the Red Wall and all those revolutionaries are there. They're not bloody revolutionaries. A lot of members took the easy way out. We had the party in our grasp. 500,000 of us, we could have changed the party. We could have stick with Corbyn. We could have win socialism first time in my working life of over 60 years. We got close to get a socialist government. But you know, there's people who said you can't be a socialist and be a member of the Labour Party. What can I do? If you're on Facebook, and some of you are, you can see my policies. Starmer is a war criminal. The Labour cabinet, most of them are war criminals. The 2 MPs in Luton, 2 women, are on the point of resigning from the shadow cabinet. Our 2 constituencies has been suspended for over 2 years. And all the Luton Labour Party is 80% of the members are Kashmiris, and we have out of 36 Labour councillors, 19 are Kashmiris and black. There's no politics in any of them. No politics at all. It's people self-serving, looking for opportunities. When I was a councillor, I just drew my expenses and got a small fee. But now, you know, you start off with £8,000 a year, and then you get more for allowances and so on. They never do sweet nothing here. So the Labour Party, you know, we've got to fight. Socialism is not given. And to think you're holier than thou, I left the party, only joined it for Corbyn, and then I left when Corbyn lost out. That's not socialism. Socialism is you go through thick and thin. I'm a member of Unite. I was a union officer of the GMB for 12 years.
Jim?
And I tell you, I've got 3 complaints about
Jim?
racism within
Jim,
Unite. I'm getting nowhere. And Unite is not unique. The rest is the same.
Jim, I'm going to have to stop you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being on time, for allowing me to interrupt you. Our next speaker is Phil Clark. You need to unmute, Phil.
Yeah, no worries. And it's my first one of these meetings, so thanks for sort of the open invitation to them. I just get a feeling, you know, like so many other discussions, we go through this, and then the people who thought we should be in the Labour Party in the beginning will stay in the Labour Party, and the people who think we shouldn't be in the Labour Party at the beginning will not be in the Labour Party, and we won't have got anywhere. You know, it's in some ways like King Canute stuff to tell people to stay in the Labour Party because people are leaving in droves, you know. But equally, I don't think anyone could deny the arguments about the failures to build an alternative left organisation outside the Labour Party. So this sort of dichotomy of, you know, there's this position and that position, and you've got to pick one or the other. It's just not getting us anywhere. You know, what is the fundamental problem? Why did the Corbyn stuff fail? Well, because, well, firstly, why were people attracted to Corbyn when they weren't attracted to Tusk and all that sort of stuff? Because they thought he could realistically form a government. The problem is, of course, he was never going to form a government. That was just never going to happen. So the issue always comes back to like the low level of political understanding of most, even people who consider themselves relatively on the left across the country. So what have we got to do? We've got to try and get Marxist ideas and socialist ideas out in the Labour Party. We've got to try and do it outside the Labour Party. We've got to try and do it in the unions. We've got to do it all. And that means, I think, we've got to stop having this divide as an absolute dividing line and have some sort of organisation where people can learn from each other and work together regardless of their their positions, you know, on the Labour Party or not being in the Labour Party. If you're outside the Labour Party, you ain't going to win elections. If you're inside the Labour Party, you say something, you're probably going to get kicked out. You know, there's no good answer to this. We've got to stop pretending we have all the answers, realise that we don't know whether there'll be another Corbyn surge or whether, you know, there'll be other ways for the left to make progress, and try and work together and organise together regardless of our positions on those things. And that's why I'm interested in this group, really, because it seems to be a place where people can discuss these things without having to settle on a fundamental position, and then we can work through it together. And ultimately what we need to do is try and make Marxism the common currency of our movement and the common currency of the class. And that's going to take everyone, everyone having the ability to work together regardless of your individual positions on the tactical question, like the Labour Party.
Thanks. And finished on 3 minutes. I don't know whether you're timing yourself, but you got it bang
I
on.
wasn't, but just a natural rhythm, I guess.
Okay, Julie Furlong, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi. What was I going to say? I was going to say a lot of things, and luckily I didn't get around to it in time, so I've calmed down a bit now. I don't like being told I have a responsibility to do anything, I have to say, because I believe I do not have the responsibility to do anything, and also I don't believe that anyone has the right to tell me that. Also, I was until very recently in the Labour Party, and I fought. In fact, I remember my very first meeting here with you all was saying, give me a reason to stay in the Labour Party and fight in it. You tried your best, but it didn't work. The final straw for me was when Starmer said he wasn't going to let Corbyn stand without even going to the NEC. Not because it was Corbyn. I'm not particularly bothered about that. What I'm bothered about is that this man was quite happy to deny what little democracy was left in the party in order to do what he wanted. That, for me, summed up the Labour Party. And yes, it's not a socialist party. So why would a socialist want to be in it? And yeah, there's many reasons that people want to, and that's fair enough. But I'm a socialist. I don't want to be in a party that's a conservative, which is what that current group of people are. They're aiding and abetting war crimes. They always have. Of course they have. They're a party of the establishment. So in some ways, I agree with the last speaker in terms of that. I don't believe we should be putting so much time and energy into this question, because even the people I speak to, okay, I don't speak to many people in politics anymore for various reasons. I speak to normal people who are not in politics, but are still going to be the ones to have to vote. No one I know is voting Labour because they want to, whether they're in the party or not. They don't see an alternative. But also a lot of people ain't going to vote for him because of various things said and done. They're not going to vote for him. But the working class ain't stupid. And that, I'm sorry, this is what I keep coming back to, because this is the impression I get from we must do more reading, we must know more about history. No, we bloody don't. People know what's happening in this country. They don't like it, but they can't see an alternative. And yet, there isn't one at the minute. So I agree with the last speaker. It's not that simple. But so we need to stop wasting time on something that we can't find an answer to and look at something we can for a change. There, I've said it now.
All right, thanks very much. I'm going to bring Irene in, and then I'm going to go back to Steve. So get yourself ready for any thoughts you have, Steve, about what you've heard so far. Irene, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I don't want to be rude. I'm trying to say this diplomatically, but I'm not sure how productive the endless discussions about staying in, staying out of the Labour Party, Starmer is bad. It's been done to death. From the very beginning, people were saying it, and it goes round in circles. What I think we failed to do is do a really strong, hard-hitting analysis of how we lost control, power, and influence. Any that we had after the Second World War has been eroded. In my mind, that's due to the successful planning of Buchanan and the Chicago Group, and it's written in the Ridley Report, which everybody ignores, which says how they are going to bring us down here, and we can reverse it. I think the time has to come where we see how we lost power and how we can regain it, and not just talk about staying within the systems that we have failed to take advantage of. Just doing that and carrying on the same doesn't seem to me to be very fruitful. That we could go on longer than that, but really I do think that I believe in Ralph Miliband. The Labour Party was set up to defeat socialism, and it did it very well. Sorry, I think that sort of discussion would be much more productive, particularly because we need it, because we are in a crisis. The lack of representation of ordinary people, corporatism, the control they're having, the military-industrial complex across the world, we are seeing what they are doing, and we can't just idly talk about sitting in the Labour Party and whether that's the best thing. Sorry, that's my opinion.
Okay, I really don't apologise. That part of these forums are that people can say really what they think is going on, and we can exchange views in a comradely manner. You know, and it is a point. Why are we discussing this? That's a good point to be made. I'm going to pass back to Steve, who A, might answer that in a way, and B, take up some of the other points that he's heard.
Thanks very much. I think it's a really friendly and open discussion, and we should all be very proud of that. If anyone thinks I'm lecturing anyone about responsibility or anything, it wasn't meant in that context. It was meant in the terms that if you are a socialist, and everyone here is, I do believe that your responsibility as a socialist is to be in the Labour Party, not damning you or whatever as a responsibility. I just believe that is where socialists should be, because whether we like it or not, I've come to Ed first. I'd really like Ed to come back in. And I understand that, the points made by Phil and then Irene and others, that, particularly Irene there, that we go around in circles, and Phil, that we need some sort of group that can include everybody in. I'm not sure that's entirely possible, although perhaps we'd all like it. I think the reality is that we keep coming back to this conversation. I think if we don't, we come back and analyse it and try to analyse where we're going with it as socialists, we will have a situation whereby we were, not perhaps myself or a few others who had, like Jim, proudly stood in the Labour Party throughout the Blair years. We were in a situation where, with all due respect, and I mean this wholeheartedly, that we were at a standing start at the time of the Corbyn surge. The left, comrades on this call and others who joined because they saw a Corbyn surge, were at a standing start. The whole point is to be in a party that you have a perspective that the working class will move towards. And it's not a question that we want a failed government. We don't. We want a socialist government that carries out a socialist program for our class. But it's a question of, if that isn't delivered and fails, what will be the reaction of the working class? It's a question, not something you desire. You, of course, don't desire that. We all on this call, we all want the best. We're an aspirational, isn't it? Socialism is aspirational. I think, really, I think Graham, I'm not sure he's on this call anymore, but I think the whole point is history. I mean, for those comrades on here who've said Corbyn is an aberration, I think I'm really not sure that takes into account the history of the struggles of the left within the Labour Party. We've had conversation before, this is not for tonight, on these meetings about the characterisation of the Labour Party, so I'm not going to repeat that. That was an excellent discussion. But this Corbynism moment is not an aberration in the history of the Labour Party. We can go to the 70s, we can go to the 80s, we can go to the 50s, we can go to the 30s. Perhaps we can have a session on the history of the Labour Party. But it is not an aberration to say that out of the blue there was a 5-year period where it was an aberration, because that is clearly not accurate historically within the Labour Party, whether we like that or not. And it isn't just to sit here and say that I agree at the moment. There's not a lot of room for activity, perhaps, within the Labour Party, absolutely. But that's not what we're discussing. What we're discussing is the perspective for future struggles within the Labour Party. That's what we're discussing here. We're discussing the possibility of future struggles here within the Labour Party. I don't think, just flicking through the points here, but I don't actually think that I think it's incorrect to say that Corbyn could not have won an election. I don't think that's correct at all. I think if Corbyn had had another 2 weeks in 2017, he most likely would have won. And if he hadn't have been sabotaged by the right wing, he clearly would have won. So I don't think that's necessarily plays out correctly.
I'm going to stop you there, Steve, and ask you to come back.
Yeah,
on
just very quickly, two very quick points. I'd like Ed to come back in, which I've said, because I'm never sure when people ask that question that I'm bringing forward something that is a general principle, what the alternative is, because the alternative has failed, and I'd like people to address that, because I believe that all attempts is to fail, and you join the Labour Party at a standing start, and I don't think that serves the class at all. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I gave you a little bit more time there because there was a lot to answer.
Thank you, very kind.
Right, we're going for a second round now. I'm tempted to keep people to 2 minutes because we might run out of time, but Matthew, do your best.
Okay, right, I'll try. I think the thing is, in 2017, if Corbyn had won the election, he would not have been allowed to take office. The right wing would have refused him the right to be PM. They were clearly under instruction not to do it. So I mean, there was no way he would be allowed in. I mean, even if he was allowed in, he wouldn't have carried out his program. There's no question of that. The thing is, I mean, I think the thing is to look at the Labour Party over the whole period. I mean, it's a deep contradiction, isn't it? You have, the left essentially is under the control of the right wing, and you have this, obviously the contradiction and the wrestling and so on and so forth, in which the left occupies a certain position within the Labour Party, which is allowed more or less in one way or another. And it goes back and forward and so on and so forth. And this allows, I mean, obviously a control, it's a degree of control. I mean, the Labour Party has been described as a prison house of socialists. And people obviously occupy a lot of their time and effort, in doing things like changing the constitution and the rules of the Labour Party, which of course, I mean, is basically a waste of time, because obviously the right wing will ignore the rules as far as for their own purposes. I mean, the rule book only ever applies to the left, as any fool know. The thing is also, you see, I mean, what you've also got, in terms of the right wing itself has changed. I mean, I was in the Labour Party in the 1980s because the right wing still had some kind of Labour movement tradition in it. Broadly, they came out of the Labour movement. Now, of course, the right wing got zero Labour movement tradition. They're just not interested. They're just careerists. There's no basis in the working class whatsoever, really. It's an entirely different organisation. And the thing is, if you look at it over the period, actually, the Labour Party ceases to be a really mass organisation within place of strife in the late 60s, in which huge numbers of people left, because obviously the effort of Wilson and so on to crush the trade unions by the use of in place of strife, it destroyed this mass base that they had to a large degree. And the Labour Party, the membership of the Labour Party has been declined ever since. With the exception of what happened under Corbyn. Now, the thing is, what happened with the Blair thing, of course, Blair had control, so he didn't need to deal with the left. What Corbyn did was to terrify the right. So what Starmer's project is to destroy the left and get rid of it and make sure it can't ever come back. So it will change the whole nature of the organisation.
I'm going to stop you there, Matthew.
Yeah,
you made your point well. I'm going to stop you there.
No.
Minnie's house.
Hi, it's me again. I'm going to use one of Graham's terms, though. Right, okay. We're coming up to Halloween. Young people are encouraged to think the real ghouls are ghosties, spiders, monsters, Dracula, all that kind of thing. Well, who are the real ghouls? Well, I live in Liverpool, and I walked around the complex where the security wouldn't let you hardly very near for the Labour Party conference. And I saw the ghouls. They were wearing slick city suits. They support privatising the NHS. They support the cuts. The Labour Party has support locally in councils, has supported austerity cuts. Women have been made to pay for finance capital, for bankers. I don't get my pension till I'm 67. Disabled people have been made to pay, and it's going to get worse. So who are the real ghouls? The real ghouls are the ruling class. And the working class needs not to be, and here's where I'm going to borrow a term from my lovely Liverpool fella, need not be ghoulable. We know who the real ghouls are, and we need to put it out there. And we need somewhere to do it from. We need somewhere to mass together. We need a working class party for socialism, communism. I think if you're in the Labour Party, you're going to hide. What's the point? Yeah. So when we need to change tactics, we need an anti-capitalist party. We've got climate change. The Labour Party they're not going to solve anything. How many times does the Labour Party have to fail the working class? For the working class to actually learn that lesson. And that's what we're looking to do. Look at history. We only have to go back so far in recent history to see how they're failing us. So who are the real ghouls? The real ghouls are the ruling class everywhere. They're murderers. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, so just to develop some of the points that I was making, maybe sort of explore some common ground with Steve, because I thought it was a really interesting response. I think that obviously a major part of Steve's argument, as I understand it, is that when the class moves, it moves sort of through its traditional mass organisations, hence the Labour Party, among other things. But I think that is only a small part of the equation, or only one part of the equation. Let's put it that way. It might be quite a big part, but only one part of the necessary equation. Because what we also need to think about is not only whether we as individuals with socialist views can join the Labour Party, but we also need to think about realistically what are the prospects for building an openly socialist organisation within the Labour Party. And I think, of course, we could have endless debates over many sessions about the history of it all. But I think looking at the history of it, starting from early on in the Labour Party's history, where the Marxists in Britain were openly affiliated to it, and that was tolerated and allowed, then moving through the 1920s and 30s, where they tried to kick the Communist Party out, but a lot of CLPs disaffiliated, in effect taking the side of the communists rather than taking the side of the Labour leadership, moving through the 70s and 80s, where there was a successful effort to expel people belonging to the militant tendency, and then through the 90s, where you ended up with bans and proscriptions of various groups, and then finally into the purge within the Labour Party that we've seen in the past 5 years or so, where it's not even about excluding serious organisations anymore. It's just an arbitrary system where there is no genuine freedom of political belief, no freedom to advance your own politics if the Labour Party leadership of the day doesn't like it, and they don't have to give any reasons, and no one is really likely to come to any substantial defence of you if you are kicked out. And so my argument is the prospects for building a successful open communist organisation in the Labour Party, I think, are very low right now. It would be great to be proved wrong by that, and I think if we did end up with a successful communist organisation in this country, it would have to work out a pretty serious organisation to the tens of thousands of people who remain, or probably would remain, in the Labour Party for quite some time. And so I think not being divided by that tactic of whether we're in or out, it is important.
Yeah.
But I think it's not viable right now. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to ask if there's anybody who hasn't spoken, if they'd like to speak, put their hands up. Some comments have been made in the chat by Madeleine, by Andreas. If there's anybody, Bob, anybody who wants to speak, Peter, if you have anything to say. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for a few minutes. I'm going to abuse my position as chair. Oh, Peter, I shall bring you in. Go on then, Peter. You have to unmute yourself. And then I'll abuse my position as chair after you. Go on.
Absolutely. Yes, comrades. The only thing I want to contribute, because it's been a very interesting discussion, I've learned a fair bit. There's some fair points that need thinking about. But I was surprised to find the unions, in a sense, coming under attack for not doing anything. When we've had this massive strike wave over the last year and a bit, and we still got that strike wave. It's still on, especially on the railways, where industrial action is still taking place. One of the points I make is that the RMT, which is the biggest union in the rail industry, is actually not in the Labour Party. It's not affiliated because it was booted out when they supported the comrades in Scotland, the Scottish Socialist Party comrades in Scotland. They were booted out. So the biggest union in the railway industry is not in the Labour Party. Yet the RMT has a massive impact on working class people within this country, because they look at Mick Lynch, they listen to what he has to say, and he does have a big impact and a big influence. So you can do things outside the Labour Party. It's not a case that you have to be in the Labour Party. But what I would say is that I don't think, if you are still in the Labour Party, then you should be fighting as best you can for, to bring forward socialist policies, resolutions, all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't exclude you from actually supporting like an organisation outside the Labour Party. And I'd love to see a proper Communist Party being formed, where we could, where we could challenge the Labour Party. Because I think the problem is that when the election takes place, the hopes will be raised, the aspirations will be raised, and they will be quickly dashed, because Starmer will just not do what he's promised to do. He's quite good at that. He's got form on that, and that they will be disillusioned. It's not a case of they'll suddenly go angry and go, right, let's have a Communist Party. They'll be very, very disillusioned, and the problem is that disillusionment within the working class could result in, as you say, people leaving the unions, but more importantly, actually going to the right, like we've seen around the world. And we could have a move in the working class towards the right wing, and a dismissal of socialism. Thank you very much. Well done, Peter. Almost bang on time. Thanks. Phil. You should expect that from a train driver. Phil.
Did you want to come in first, Will? Because
No, you go on, Phil. Go on.
All right. I think in the future, I'll be interested to see if there's possibility to have a discussion about the unions and the bureaucracy, because I do think that's quite a complex issue that we've made lots of sort of allusions to, but it warrants a deeper look at. Look, one thing I don't think we do very well on the left, and this is people inside the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party, is take democracy very seriously in terms of the democracy of the state. I think we kind of make these assumptions, even when we're quite involved in politics, that we do live in a democracy. We don't really. I'm not saying we live in a dictatorship. I know we don't, but actually, we've got an unelected head of state, unelected second chamber. Our local councils have no power and no money, unlike other countries where there's a bit of more power at local level. That throws everything onto the House of Commons, which is elected on a completely undemocratic first past the post system. That throws everything onto the internal democracy of the two major parties, and both major parties are entirely corrupt internally. That's not a functioning democracy, really. And I think one thing we should be able to unite on, whether you're inside the Labour Party, whether you're outside the Labour Party, and the sort of thing I see any sort of organisation that is able to attract and encompass people who are in and outside the Labour Party, is the battle to democratise the state, alongside fighting on the sort of paying conditions and living standards stuff, which you've obviously got to do. We need to be getting out there. Yeah, you can elect a Labour government, but you're not really going to get a Labour government because you don't actually have democracy, and they wouldn't let you. Yeah, they might let Corbyn win the election, but they wouldn't have let him take power. That government would have collapsed, if not immediately, within a few weeks. Equally, you could spend hours stuffing leaflets for Tusk through the door and end up with 12 votes. Until we start really saying we've got to democratise the state alongside fighting on the paying conditions things, then I think we're sort of pretending to ourselves that we can make progress democratically when we can't.
Okay, thanks very much. I can't see any other hands up. We are getting to 8:45. I'll just say a few things, just from my perspective, just noting down what I think I've heard from the discussion, and also then bring Steve back in. Yeah. So Steve, you can kind of have a 5 or 10 minutes to summarize what you think you've heard as well. I think we're in a tricky position here, because asking socialists in the Labour Party what the long-term strategy is puts them in danger of being thrown out if they say what they think their long-term strategy is. So I think there's a difficulty there, because one thing is that I don't think anybody thinks the Labour Party is going to deliver socialism in this country. That's my assumption, unless there's somebody who thinks that will happen. And for me, the question in my mind is that historically, the one thing we know about history is really that everything changes and nothing is permanent. And I would say even the Labour Party. And the question is, when is that permanency in people's political thinking, or the political situation we find ourselves in going to shift? And speaking to somebody who's part of an organisation who's one of the central leaders said in 1970 about the Labour Party, let it bleed. And then 10 years later, everybody was in the Labour Party, or most people went into the Labour Party as part of that organisation. You never can tell, actually. And you didn't, and I'm not sure, although people look back and they look at, talk about Miliband and people joining the party under Miliband and all that kind of stuff. Really, it was quite difficult to see the Corbyn surge coming until it arrived. Now, there is a question about whether that's repeatable. Because my view is that the ruling class learn from history just like we do. In fact, sometimes they seem to learn faster than we do and better than we do. And the question is whether ever there is going to be a gap like that ever again. And the reason I say that is because what kind of made those gaps possible was the existence of the material base of social democracy in this country. And I'm beginning to wonder whether the window of the material base of social democracy is closing or has closed. And that what you will get is, as some people have posed it, is a hangover of the Labour Party as an organisation that will crash in the face of that material reality. And actually, Starmer's not making any secret of that, is he? Rachel Reeves' economics are neoliberal economics, straight down the line, Chicago school economics. Yeah. So they're not making any secret of where they think they're going. But for me, the question is Corbyn, aberration. I agree with Steve. I don't think Corbyn was an aberration, actually. I think his politics were well within the mainstream of the Labour Party in the 60s and 70s. you know, we went to election on a manifesto that was in favour of NATO, under Corbyn. I don't think he was an aberration, but the question is whether those kind of politics can exist within the Labour Party in the next period, and I'm not sure. I am not sure they can. For me, though, that doesn't discount the question of whether what we used to describe as fraction work. What I want to know is why did, and this is not for discussion now, but something that we need to think about. Why did so many organisations split over work in the Labour Party? Why was it not possible to think that the working class has got lots of different politics in it? Yeah, and some of it is in the Labour Party, and some of it's in the trade unions, and some of it's in no part of that. And why has it not been possible to build an organisation, a socialist organisation, that can contain those kind of material differences in different sections of the working class? I think that's something that we need to think through. But I do think we need to build a mass socialist party. But I also think that that doesn't discount, for me, having a fraction inside the Labour Party where and when necessary. But I can really understand the feelings that people have about the Labour leadership and the Labour Party now, given what's A, happening in Palestine, and B, clearly what is to come if Starmer wins the election. It's going to be a firestorm. That might be an argument to leave. It might be an argument to stay. Make your own mind up. I'm going to bring Steve back in. That's 7, Steve. 7 minutes, yeah?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think this is a testimony to this group that I've enjoyed coming onto the meetings since Nick invited me on some 6 months, I think, so ago, or whenever. And because I think there's obviously a lot of deeply held positions here, a lot of anger towards what's gone on in the past period. I think Janet spoke quite beautifully, quite movingly about the way she feels. And I think there's a lot of feeling like that. And I really appreciate that. And I think that has been the spirit of this discussion, so that when we all finish and put something on the telly or whatever we're going to do, we can enjoy a good discussion. But just to come back on the very few points, I think it's not really a question, is it? We've all got an opinion, we've all got an idea, we've all got an understanding of the way we believe that things will pan out. And I think the real question is, we're left with this question, perhaps, is the best way of putting this. I think we'll finish there with, we need to build a mass socialist party. I would say, in my view, that's the wrong way to look at it, because in the sense the working class will build a mass socialist party. Our role is to establish the mechanism by which we can influence that and ensure that it flows, and we build with it, and we lead it, and in a sense, perhaps the secret of that is contained within the Bolsheviks and the 1917 revolution, because the Bolsheviks were extremely isolated in February 1917, and 8,000 members. And then by September, they controlled the Petrograd Soviet. They're 240,000 members, and the whole thing exploded from there. And I think that, for me, is a mass organization, a mass socialist party. It's not a question of us saying we want to have a socialist party. Of course we do, or mass socialist party, whatever the name of that is. And I think the real question is, where do the working class go when they emerge into struggle? My understanding of what I've read, and my understanding of the history of what I've read, and perhaps my own history, is that the working class will grapple towards the mass organization. At the start, I can't remember the comrade's name, John, I believe it is. If I'm wrong, I apologize. The very first contribution spoke about France. Now, for me, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Party of Social Democracy. In France at the moment, it might not be the Party of Social Democracy. It might be whatever. In Argentina, you could make the case that the mass organization is the Peronists, which have, by the way, had a very interesting election victory, there is a second round to go. So this question is wider, it's international, and perhaps at some point that can be discussed. But for me, I think the ultimate thing is, where does it go? The Corbyn surge, did we see it coming? Did we see it coming in the way it came? Did we see the explosion in the way it came? No, but we had an understanding that it was possible that it came at a certain point. And my argument, my point that I've been trying to make tonight is that if we have that perspective that that is going to take place, then and we have a perspective that we need to be within the Labour Party, tough as it is at times. And I take Minnie's points on board about motions and everything. We've all had our own issues with that, trust me. We need to be looking at that perspective, because that is the question. Where do the working class turn to? Do they turn to a Marxist socialist party that's outside the Labour Party that they don't know exists, or do they grapple towards the Labour Party? My assertion is that they grapple towards the Labour Party. Is there a window for social democracy in a traditional sense? Perhaps not. Perhaps that window has closed. But does that rule out the fact that the working class will move towards the Labour Party because of the nature of that? And I'll just finish on this. This question of how big the party is in certain places in Norfolk or in Scotland. In 2013 and 2014, the Labour Party was also dead. The Corbyn surge built the Labour Party. It built the branches that are now empty again. So the whole thing about the dialectical movement of working class people in and out of the Labour Party is they will build their own wards, they will build their own GCs. And my understanding of the history I've got, and I do take on board Ed's point that he's put on the chat, is a complex conversation. It is an understanding that regarding where we're at with the socialist project, which is why I think these meetings are really interesting, because it's not a question that I'm 100% right. Who knows how it's going to pan out? But I think we do need to maintain, as socialists, a perspective towards the Labour Party, because I believe that the working class will move towards the Labour Party, whether or not we like that or not. I don't believe they look for independent socialist parties, Marxist parties, or pure socialist parties. I believe, whether rightly or wrongly, they look towards the Labour Party. And I believe that as socialists, we should face towards the Labour Party and join and be members, because when the Corbyn surge comes, the next surge, we need to be prepared and ready for that. And you can only look internationally to see many, many examples of surges towards mass parties, mass organisations. But I'll leave it there. I did message Nick about cameras. I think this perhaps a conversation we can have at a later date with the cameras off, and a bit more frank about what we think about certain individuals and perspectives. But I think it's been a very worthwhile exercise, and perhaps with a different perspective to most on the call. I've really enjoyed the experience, and I thank you for inviting me to make some alternative points. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, for doing the introduction. It was, and being part of the conversation, is really good. I mean, I'd like to thank everybody here, actually, because I thought that was a massively constructive conversation, and we did all come from very different points of view. And that's basically what TAS is about. It's about socialists, communists, having these political conversations, working our way through issues, and debating out what we think the way forward for socialists and communists are. So thank you to everybody for attending. Thanks to Steve. I'd just like to point you in the direction of our next meeting in a fortnight, which starts at 7 p.m. Okay, 7 p.m, not 7:30. And Mushi Makover is going to be introducing on Palestine, which I know everybody here has fixed on and also is finding very distressing to see. We're going to have a political discussion about Palestine and communist and socialist attitudes towards that issue. Okay, Ed, if you can stay on, that would be great. But I'd just like to say goodbye to everybody else, and see you next time.